Right, we'll move on to where are we? Reconstitution of the Māori participation with item 16. Now, Nicola, you're used to Nicola's also in the frame for questions for this, so does anyone have any questions? You'll move. Is there any question? Councillor Mathews, you have a question.
Just looking back at some of the original paperwork, is this a memorandum of understanding that we're supposed to update on an annual basis, or is this something that we update at our pleasure?
Through the Chair, the Memorandum of Understanding signed back in 2006, and that still stands. All that's being updated here is the council representatives on the working party.
I understand that, but the question is, under the terms of the original MOU, are we supposed to update it on an annual basis, or does it just sit there?
There is an annual work program that's updated. It doesn't generally come to council, but it can be reported.
I can be corrected, but my understanding is that we are, because of the different membership, we address this each term. But I may be wrong about that. That's my understanding. By necessity, because of the change of membership.
Your wish. Sorry.
To that question from Councillor Black. My understanding is, look, a review would occur providing the parties were agreeable that a review was required. My understanding when it was signed, they talk about the expected term 2016. But I imagine if the parties chose to review it before that time, that review would proceed. So I don't think there's a set review period, but
no necessity every year or every 3 years even to do that. Okay, now I just want to clarify the point.
Can I make a comment, Your Worship? It probably is time to update the memorandum, and we noticed in these papers that there's one thing that needs to be updated in the terms of reference as well, that it makes reference to consideration being given to the inclusion of a representative of non-Ngāi Tahu Māori, and that change has taken place, so we'd like to amend that in the terms of reference today.
Okay. So
and just to make a comment that probably is time to update the memorandum to reflect those changes.
So
Shall I just run through what that change is?
Yeah, but just to understand it, you're suggesting that we also need, you want to add to the recommendation?
All I'm saying is that there is one change that needs to be made to the terms of reference that are on 16.3. It's an error that we've noted, and what it does is also reflect the fact that, as Councillor Vandervis has noted, the memorandum's been in place some time, and it probably is about time for an update of the memorandum generally. So the reference is the last sentence of the first paragraph relating to membership.
Yes, I see that. So, what do you think? I'm just not clear about, do you want to add another recommendation? Are you suggesting we add another recommendation to change?
No. Yeah.
Okay, so the recommendations as they stand?
Yes, sorry.
Okay. Are there any further questions? Councillor Hawkins.
I just have a question about the selection of the Taurehere representative that you're referring to work with the mana whenua representations on that committee. What was the selection process that got us to who that specific representative would be, and would that be something that would ever be up for review?
I think the Taurehere representative was chosen through Aotearoa Marae, being a non-Ngāi Tahu Marae.
Yeah.
Yep. Sorry, I was referring to the marae, not the representative that they chose.
My understanding is that Aotearoa are the representatives of non-Ngāi Tahu Māori in Dunedin.
My understanding. Councillor, any further questions? Right, Councillor Noon, you were going to move? Yeah. I have one other point to make, and that is I note that in the report it mentions that the working party previously reported to the Finance Strategy and Development Committee, and I was going to suggest that it was more appropriate to report direct to council. I would have thought, but I'm open to suggestion on that, but it's a significant working party, and I don't see why it should come through a standing committee. So I would like to add to the recommendations, with your leave, Councillor Noon, that henceforth the Māori Participation Working Party report direct to council.
That is what.
So is there a second?
Yeah.
Councillor Wilson? Okay, discussion. Okay, I'm going to put it, so the recommendations are as they stand on the order paper, plus with the addition of reporting direct to council. I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. You're still here, I think. Right, 17. Representation on tertiary sector steering and planning groups. Any questions for Nicola on that? I think the report's reasonably straightforward. Any questions? Councillor, Councillor Hawkins.
Yeah, I just have a question with regard to the membership of the steering group, whether any consideration had ever been given to including student representation on the steering group. And I'm aware that there was the North Dunedin Working Party and there are MOUs with OUSA, but I think particularly given the mood for central government to remove the rights of the student body to be represented on the governing bodies of their own institutions, it may be a pertinent opportunity to look at including them as members of the tertiary sector steering group.
I think that's worthy of consideration, but I think we would need to go back to the partners, of the three partners, and get their approval or not. And I note that Council, or actually I, signed a memorandum of understanding with both the OUSA and OPSA last term, which I assume is still current. So there is some interaction, but there is... Do we need a subcommittee? Student representation. Does anybody know there's some subcommittees that feed into this?
Well, I was going to say there's representation on the Community Resilience Forum, which is a working party, but it's not a student per se.
Right. All right. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? No, I'll put all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Right. Now we move on to item 18, which is a general covering paper. By all means. So this is a covering report leading into the specific agenda items with specific applications, which are the following agenda items. So I'll open it up for questions, councillors, because I note that the recommendation is simply that that we note the implications of the current process. So this is a generic overview. Councillor McTabb.
Just a query, I really welcome this report and thank you for it. I guess I just have an overarching question about obviously the processes that you guys go through to get these applications in front of us have changed. Can you explain, we don't see all of the applications, is that right? They are effectively filtered by staff, or is it the process by which every application for an out-of-zone water connection, regardless of its likelihood of actually passing the tests that council should impose on it comes in front of council.
So the process at the moment is that all applications will come in front of council, with a handful of exceptions where there's been some level of ambiguity as to whether or not the application has already previously been approved. So we have had a few anomalous ones where, to all intents and purposes, there has been a historic approval, and therefore we are simply reinstating or confirming something that's already happened. But all of the ones where the applicant does not already have water, we are bringing in front of council regardless of whether the recommendation is yes or no. In the vast majority of those cases, the recommendation will be no, though.
Councillor Noon.
Laura, I just want to tease out the scenario you used, a real scenario you used for the Northern Pipeline, because I've heard the same discussion when you've presented to council before. So first thing first is that the pipeline went in a different location than the existing water reticulated Waitati scheme, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So council chose to put the pipe down the road. So my question is around the cost that you've quoted to link those existing water recipients, existing council water connections. Council chose to put the pipe in a certain place, which happened to be further away from those existing folk. Isn't that correct?
I think I'm talking about a different
Okay.
different example than the one you're talking about. So this was, and I can't recall whether in the final instance it was 1 or 2 properties which had previously been served off the supply line, and that supply line was one that we intended to take out of service altogether, so that we could serve from the northern schemes. And because of where they were located, so it wasn't the case that we just moved the alignment of the pipeline. We were planning to take an entire pipeline out of service, but that pipeline had 1 or 2 customers off it, and in the end we ended up, as I recall, having to pump up to those properties.
Sorry, Your Worship, I just wanted to make the point. I don't think that's a very good scenario to use as a way to ensure that this council make prudent decisions going forward, because I think that was a extraordinary situation where the practicality of putting the pipe in the same place just wasn't a goer, simply because the water was coming over the hill rather than coming from the existing tank on the side of the road. So where the pipe went through the local farmer's property and where they had connections, it wasn't practical to put it in the same place. So I think the 40k quote there is probably a little unfair. That's all I wanted to raise. That was
If I can respond though, that's exactly my point when we're talking about distribution pipelines. Distribution pipelines are, and it doesn't apply to the 2 reports that are on today, which are off retic pipelines. Distribution pipelines are designed to take bulk water from one place to another, and sometimes strategically we need to decide that we don't want to take it from there to over there. We now want to take it from here to over there. And they are major strategic decisions that have major cost implications for the city. And that was one which at the time would never have been foreseen, because people just assume that those major pipelines stay in the same place. In the short term they do, but in the long term you may abandon them. You don't generally abandon retic pipeline because that relates to where people live. But the distribution mains we could well have a very real need to say we're not going to use that supply anymore, we're going to supply that from somewhere else. So whilst they are very rare and they don't apply to the other ones later today, they do occur, and there's certainly another one that we know is likely in the future.
Can I just follow up with another question, Your Worship? Looking at the future and the future challenges that we're all going to have with the O11 bylaw, and there's obviously going to be more applicants further down the track, is it feasible for Water and Waste to come up with a list of unique circumstances which effectively, well, because I think that's part of the problem, is that the elected arm have a view and staff have a view, and sometimes we're not quite meeting, and I just wondered whether there was a bit more of a framework put around, well, in these situations they are unique, and it may come back to the point where historically there was a dwelling that was linked, it may have burnt down in the 1930s or 40s or whatever, but it was connected to the water scheme, even though it was outside the water zone boundary, for example. But is there a possibility that we'd actually get to a stage where we could have a list of extraordinary situations that we could tick the box and say, yes, staff agree, councillors agree, am I dreaming?
I think if you were going to, you'd actually have to come up from the other point and say these are not extraordinary, because by their very nature, the extraordinary ones you'd never think of. We could certainly have a go at drawing something up of that nature up, but whether or not, as I say, whether or not the view of what is extraordinary and what isn't, will reach the same point. But we could certainly have a crack at writing something that put a bit more guidance around that.
Councillor Fee.
Your Worship, can you help me understand how big the issue is? You know, given there are underlying sort of, issues of cumulative effect and carrying capacity.
Yep.
So I wondered if you could quantify that word you use there. Numerous properties out of zone, or numerous out of zone dwellings that have been connected in the past, but I don't know over what time. But do you have any? Can you just give us an idea of the extent of it?
I would have to check my figures to be sure, but I know we have looked at, and this was in relation to those that are within a particular distance to distribution mains. So that excludes all the things that are just on the urban fringes. And the number that we had, I think, was in the 40 to 50, I think, but I would have to confirm. Certainly the number that we did a GIS analysis of how many properties, physical properties, are within 100 metres of a distribution main. And we certainly were up towards a couple of hundred, I think. And say that didn't account at all for these ones, such as the ones today, where they're on the urban fringes and or subdividable land on the urban fringes. So that would become a much more significant number. I think since this policy went in, we've had about 9. So somewhere in the region of 8 or 9 that have actually come through to approval. There will be another number as well where when we tell them that the council policy is no, and they'd have to come through committee, they decide not to bother. But I would have to confirm those numbers, but should give you a reasonable flavour.
Councillor Munson, do you have another question?
I'm just recording, sorry, I think my brain might be where my phone is. I'm not here, unfortunately. The 2011 bylaw, my understanding and my recollection, just tell me if I'm wrong, is that when we confirmed that, we allowed the discretion to continue because we knew of those, and they weren't illegal, they were unofficial connections. And that was the reason we left the discretion in there for those to come to us because we...
Yep. Almost. The original bylaw actually gave nobody the authority to approve them at all, which gave us a problem because we found some historic ones that one way or another had got connected and we wanted to be able to formalise them. And that led to some changing of the wording such that those could be approved, retrospectively approved, and also allowed the council to consider the exceptions. But there was no clear guidance at that time, certainly documented, around what exceptions were.
And hence, that's up there.
This was not actually a question, but back in...
Well, do you want to hold that till... Because someone's going to move this in a minute.
Okay.
Because I sense that there'll be a bit of discussion, so there'll be plenty of...
I'm happy to move.
You'll move Councillor Tavish, second to Councillor Back.
Just
No,
tonight?
actually, I was going to ask a question.
Well, far away. Ask your question. Second Councillor Starks.
Just briefly, in the case of subdivision, how much more does a section become worth if it has a water connection? Obviously, there's a significant increase in the value. Have you got any idea of how much a developer, say, with 10 sections stands to gain if they're connected or not?
No, I have no idea what the difference is. All I would say is that once you have water supply on a property, you not only have, maybe it improves the lifestyle and the value of the property itself, but it then would tend to enable people to have more than one house on a site, and that's a factor of you know, so many $100,000 per building site on a property.
So there's a significant financial driver behind it, is what you're saying.
Yeah, that's right. I think if you have water supply to a property and then you can subdivide it and put more than one house on it, that's worth a lot of money to a developer.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Bazir, did you have a...
This is sort of questions that broaden out to a much greater degree than what I thought they're going to. I personally believe that we've got a conflict of interest in as much as we represent the people that are wanting to join up with their reticulation and I think really, I'm just looking through the report, I see that in 2011 this was a standalone bylaw was developed based on New Zealand Standard Water Supply. Does that get reviewed from time to time? And if so, well I guess it does, but has it ever been considered that the decision on issues like this with regard to the bylaw should be taken out of the councillor's hands?
Yes, it does get revised from time to time. This particular section has been revised at least a couple of times since it was originally instigated. I'm not aware of any specific consideration of taking those decisions out of the council's hands, and it was a very particular choice at the time to give the council, as opposed to staff, the ability to make these decisions, but that can always be changed.
Just a further question then, has there ever been any consideration given with regards to the bylaw in defining what extraordinary circumstances mean?
Not in the way I suspect you're suggesting, no.
Councillor Thompson, did you have another question?
Oh, that's a question about process, really. I'm just not quite sure if we're going to have a significant debate. I'm just not quite sure how it's going to relate to a recommendation that it would be impossible to vote against. Well, we've been asked to note it. I don't see how we could do other than note it. It's here to be noted, but so that I'm not quite sure what the debate's going to be about. That's really like.
Well, if there is nothing to debate, then we won't have one, presumably, but I felt, my feeling is that this round of questions has clarified my understanding, and I just imagine some of the other councillors on some of the reasoning behind this, and there will be various viewpoints put, I dare say, in the debate. Councillor Vanderbilt, you've got a question?
Yes, the suggestion just now that there was a situation where it was a staff decision in the past, and that because of some historical awkwardness, council was then empowered to make exceptional decisions. Is there any possibility, given that most of those exceptional situations have been dealt with, or historical ones at least, is there any possibility of actually having this issue going back to becoming a staff operational decision rather than having to involve elected representatives? I personally feel uncomfortable.
That question has just been asked by Councillor Bazin.
I heard him ask the question, but what he asked if it had in the past. I'm asking if in the future we could go back to a situation, or have we opened Pandora's box and can we no longer get it back in here? Are we in a situation where we can't go back to the situation, the nice simple one where you made the decisions and we were off scot-free?
The issue's always been that even with staff making the decision, applicants who are told no will have a recourse back to the council. So invariably, even if it was left with staff, it would still come back via councillors who would query the basis for that decision, hence the bylaw itself. In terms of Councillor Thompson's question, I suppose one of the issues is whether the bylaw that we've currently got and what it says about restricting the extension of reticulated supply is still what the council wants us to do. Because inherently we get into the difficulty where the staff advice based on the current bylaw and approach is to recommend a decline of those applications for the reasons that are outlined in the report. It does raise the question of whether the council would want us to review the bylaw, which would take a little bit of time, and revisit some of those assumptions. As Mr Freeland identified the bylaw as consistent at the moment with the district plan in terms of also limiting that extension, but that would be one question for you in terms of resolution, because we are going to continue to get these issues in a divergence of views.
Right, Councillor Hall, question.
Extraordinary circumstances, what would you class them as?
Typically, the staff recommendation is typically to not grant the application because it's very difficult to get to understand what those extraordinary circumstances are. It then becomes a call around the council table, and it's a judgment around whether the particular circumstances relating to those applications are extraordinary enough to be granted.
Would a 3-month drought be classed as an extraordinary event? Or
Sorry?
a long-term drought, would that be classed as a...
No. No, in our view, a long-term drought wouldn't be an extraordinary event.
Right, no more questions, it's been moved. Sorry? No question. Oh, question, Councillor Winslow.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Can I just ask the staff, when referring them to page 18.6 of the report, to look at the first paragraph, the conclusion, which reads, granting any connection to the water supply outside of designated supply areas, water properties with non-residential zoning is inconsistent with the bylaw, the 3 water strategy, the district plan and the spatial plan. In their opinion, is that still the case?
Yes.
Okay, it's been moved. Councillor Tash, second Councillor Staines. Discussion. Councillor Noon.
It's a question of the mover and the seconder. Would they entertain the idea of asking staff to look at extraordinary situations and come back to infrastructure services with some sort of recommendation and guideline that you know, here are the scenarios, and you can probably base them on, as Councillor Vanderbilt has said, on the historic connections, maybe the 7 or 8, maybe go back further. I'm sure there are plenty of situations that could be picked up and used as sort of the foundation of some sort of guidelines, because otherwise we're going to have the same discussion, the same disagreement, because the political arm have got a job to do, the staff have got a job to do. Somehow we've got to find a way in the middle, and the point I'm making, if we've got an opportunity now to direct staff to come up with some sort of guideline, and I just think if the mover and seconder were willing to add that in, I would be very happy.
Councillor McTavish.
Well, look, I would be happy to. I've just liaised with the chair of ISCOM, and she has indicated that she would be happy to take it up as an issue and progress it through infrastructure services. So I'm quite comfortable that that will happen without having a motion. But if you know, if it's not perhaps obvious that everybody supports that or whatever, then maybe we do need to put it to the vote.
Can I suggest that unless this identification of exceptional circumstances is with a view to staff being able to make the decision, then it's a waste of resources. Because if we identify possible exceptional circumstances, but the appeals or the applications are going to come back to council anyway, and we're going to thrash them around and possibly ignore them anyway, it's just extra work for staff to know in. So I would suggest that there is a point in identifying exceptional circumstances if the end point is that staff will then apply them and the applications won't come to council.
I did draft some wording if Councillor Noon wanted to hear them. And
can I just respond to the mayor's comment? Sorry, I'm not asking you to get through them here. I accept your point, Your Worship, and my answer to that will depend on the list, the makeup of the list, whether the elected arm would be prepared to take a step back and say, okay, it's over to you now, you implement you know, the guidelines, but until you've seen the list, I don't think that the elected arm will be prepared to step back. Sorry.
But I'll come to you, Councillor. We're dealing with the motion at the moment, so it relates to the motion. I'm not going to have, I'll get to you, but I can't have discussion on it until I've got some clear idea where we're heading.
Suggested change before you discuss it all twice.
So are we clear what is being added to, or potentially added to, the motion, rather than what's on the order paper?
Well, Your Worship, in the interests of not having another amendment, I wonder whether to hear Councillor Thompson's perspective on what should be moved, and then what I have got for everybody's interest and information is that a list of scenarios, or that staff draft a list of scenarios that would not constitute true exceptions, taking on Laura's point, to limit applications coming to council and provide clarity to applicants.
Okay. Councillor Thompson.
What I was going to suggest was that, with your indulgence, that in fact what is actually needed is a review of the bylaw, particularly with regard to reticulated water, because otherwise that motion actually isn't going to take us anywhere. I think that if we approve this recommendation or that recommendation, we're just going to have whatever debate we have now, we're going to have it on the next paper and the paper after. We would be better to have a thorough review of what council's wish is, because there are different views, and actually treat the individual applications before us on their own merits in the meantime. And I think if we try to do more than that, we'll be here till midnight.
Personally, I would be happy simply for the Chair of ISCOM to progress a bylaw review if that is considered the wish of Council and raised as an issue under matters for notification to the Chair. That would be my personal view, but if there is a strong view that around the table that we need to have some kind of additional motion in that regard, then I don't have a major problem with it.
All right, so I just need to know what it is that is being moved.
Your Worship, I'm happy to concede if Councillor Wilson as Chair of IS is prepared to pursue this issue through the appropriate channels. I'm more than happy to withdraw the suggested amendment.
You're happy with that, Councillor Wilson?
Yes.
Okay. So the motion
Works back to the original.
back to the recommendation. You're happy with that, Councillor Staines? Right.
The recommendation that is outlined in the order. That's it.
That's on the order paper. Is there any for Councillor Wilson?
I don't want to complicate things, but it's just, I just want to get in context something Councillor Thompson just said about if there's going to be a review or not be a review, that we'll deal with the other ones on the paper. The issue is we will still have the water bylaw, and he wasn't suggesting we wouldn't be considering that, I presume.
No, I wasn't suggesting that wouldn't. My point was simply that at the moment we have some different views around this table, and that we will continue to argue these views on each individual assumption or application, and that it might be better to have a resolution, either Councillor McTavish's view prevails, for want of an exemplar, in which case I just then have to shut up for the rest of the time, or my view prevails and she'll just have to accept it. But I mean, we need a resolution to this, and I fully accept staff's concern that this is going to be an ongoing thing, but I think that there is an issue that has different views around the table, and it would be better to deal with it through a review of what it is that council wants, rather than trying to ask for a list of exceptional circumstances for which there will always be a new one that you've never thought of.
Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm still a bit puzzled by this, because when I read the papers, I agreed with some of the comments that we'd read in the internal mail about the issue of this coming here. Now, clearly there is some history with the previous council, and we've had some revelations as of part of that, and I don't want to prolong things with any more of it, but I can't imagine, with the confirmation of the paragraph that I asked the staff to look at a moment ago and councillors to read, that council could be any more unequivocal about what its policy is. It's pretty clear, and I agree with the comments about trying to draft a list of exceptional circumstances, because that would make anything that wasn't on the list an exceptional circumstance, and you would have dug an even bigger hole for yourselves. But to me, this is an issue, a classical issue of the problems with planning issues and what you can call infrastructure creep. You know, that everyone knows what's happened with the sealing of Chain Hills Road. There's no reticulated services, it had roof water and an unsealed road. And over time, by the third or fourth rural residential owner, suddenly the dust on the roof in the water was a problem, and there was a demand for that service plus other reticulated services. And if we're really serious about trying to have a compact city, we've got to stop well-intentioned but suicidal decisions about the size of our infrastructure. The population in the city is growing only very, very conservatively. Every little extra bit of infrastructure, even if it's only a little main for another trickle service somewhere, makes the pie, the same size pie, smaller slices, bigger slices for those who pay the bill, I think I mean. But you know exactly what I mean, I just had to think about the pie. We do need a bigger pie, and if we had growth, if it were sustainable, then we'd be able to do this sort of thing or consider it. But the idea of people who applied for a building consent, a resource consent for subdivision and subsequent building consent, on the basis of no reticulated water supply, trotting along a few years later and saying, oh, we like water now, thank you very much, I think is ridiculous. And makes not only the council look a bit Mickey Mouse, but frankly, makes the job of the staff extraordinary. I would hope that we could come to this organisation could come to a position where if someone did have a genuine issue that was different, that could always be handled through the Infrastructure Services Committee. And if after that forum someone came up with a genuine recommendation that was supported by staff that a connection should be put in place, then it might come back to council. But the policy document and all the other ones, including some of the comment that was made at the forum today, I find quite extraordinary, and I think that it is a waste of this council's time. More importantly, it's an extraordinary waste of staff time, as we see from the bulk of these reports that have been generated. And I'll support this recommendation, but I certainly wouldn't like to see a repeat of this process at the council table.
Councillor Kelly.
Just a general view, each new water supply, good potable drinking water for somebody in Dunedin, since we haven't got more people in Dunedin, is a replacement for a water supply that wasn't so secure and possibly a cosier and warmer and better ventilated and better looked after home than the home they were living in, because it's the same person, because we're not growing.
Look, I just want to clarify what I think is a necessary distinction here. There's a distinction between liking this bylaw or not, and liking having a bylaw or not. And I think it's important to appreciate that we expect staff projecting out infrastructure renewal budgets, etc., to do it on the basis of predictable planning. And over the last couple of years, we have a lot of effort, staff have put a lot of effort into trimming those projections as much as they can. And they are on the basis of, yes, we know where we're going to allow reticulated services, and we know where we won't. And as has been pointed out, we settle them in the spatial plan, we settle them in the district plan, we settle them in a number of things. If we then turn around and say, oh well, there's someone else, someone's changed their mind about what they need and we'll give it to them, that doesn't just throw out the supply, that throws out all the planning that we've expected, all the projections on renewals and budgets and everything that we've expected staff to sort out. So what I'm pointing out is that there does need to be a consistent and a consistently applied bylaw. So by all means we should feel free to question whether it's the right one, but what I'm sensing around the table is, well, there's an inclination on some people's, perhaps on some people's part, to say, well, let's have a bylaw, but let's make it nice and flexible so that we can change it. Well, actually, that's really dumb and really putting unacceptable expectations on staff to plan budgets going forward. That's all I have to say about it anyway. I'm going to put this motion now. Well, Councillor McTavish.
Very reply.
Councillor McVanus.
I agree entirely with what you've said, Mayor, and Councillor Benson-Pope. And also Councillor Lord, when he said what a good report this was. I think staff have really gone to a lot of trouble to really very clearly state what the issues are, and these are very difficult decisions to make, which is why I'm so keen for staff to be able to make them in the first instance. I would like it to be considered that not only that the recommendation as written, but that a second recommendation that staff be empowered to make out-of-zone decisions, noting that there is still the appeal process via council. So, Mr Avery mentioned a little while ago that the process used to be that staff would make a decision, and if the applicant was really not happy about it, there was still the right of appeal. In a legal situation, there are quite specified and fairly narrow grounds for appeal, and I think that we could look at those, but I'm just wondering if the mood of the council was to go further than just noting this report and add something to the effect that staff might be empowered to make these decisions in the first place.
Well, I'm happy to take that as a separate motion, but I think that my sense is that it would be prolonging the discussion to incorporate in this one, and we just deal with this one and then...
All right, move it. Can I then just briefly say regarding, forget the extra bit, regarding what we have at the moment, Councillor Benson-Pope mentioned infrastructure creep and gave a very good example of it. It very quickly becomes urban sprawl, and the spatial plan has very clearly showed that that's really not where we want to be going. Mr Freeland has also pointed out that once you have a water connection, then there's roading, lighting, sewage, rubbish collection, and the criticism has been made, I'm sorry, I forget by who, that, I think it was Councillor Thompson, that perhaps the Water Department is being asked to be a policeman for the Planning Department. I think point guard was the term used. The way I would look at it is that staff have to look at, all staff in all different departments have to look at and deal with the district plan, and the Water Department have to be able to resonate with the district plan and support the Planning Department in making their decisions. So they're not actually being a point guard, they're not actually policing the district plan as such, they're being consistent with it. And I think that is really a situation that we should give them full opportunity to be able to easily do, given that it's not a very easy decision to make.
Councillor Tash.
Yeah, look, I wholeheartedly endorse Councillor Van Visser's comments, and I think through the discussion, the final comment that I would like to make is that whilst Kate, you might be, or Councillor Wilson, you might be working through this with an infrastructure services head on, I think that it is imperative that there are connections with the Regulatory and Planning Committee, because they are so tightly interconnected, and the outcomes are, as often as the outcomes might be negative from a planning perspective because of water decisions, equally planning decisions can have a significant negative outcome for any water work that's done. So it is so imperative that they talk well to each other.
Now, Councillor Thompson, did you want to...
Well, just to clarify, I spoke earlier in regard to the motions, trying to change the motion, but my concern here is not that we don't need a bylaw, and not that a bylaw shouldn't be specific, but that the measures that we use for determining where we will do things and what we will do should relate specifically to the parameters associated with that and not some other parameter. And so, for example, where we have a reticulation system where there is no shortage of supply, where there is no operational concern, then we ought to make a decision based on our ability to supply without additional cost to ratepayers. And if there is an ability to supply without additional cost to ratepayers, then I think we should supply. I don't think we should use a catch-all alternative kind of proxy that means that we have to have one rule fits all. Now, if you were going to do that, then you could, in fact, ask staff to look at each area where we have reticulated supply. You could look at what the capacity is in that area. You could look at what the zoned residential capacity is, occupied and currently unoccupied. You could make a decision then whether you have capacity and for what length of time you have capacity. And you could say that it would not be possible to do something here for purely operational reasons. And in another area, you would say, well, if it was at no cost to council, it would be possible to do this here because there's no operational reason or risk factor that would stop us. And then we would be making decisions based on empirical evidence, empirical data, for the right reasons. I get very frightened, and I've said this before, of rules-based approaches that do not enable us to, or prevent us from having to think. So I would prefer that we looked at this in the long term. I accept we have an immediate situation now and we'll have to make those decisions however we do. But it's not, as your worship suggests, that I want to see the absence of a bylaw or a bylaw that is so nebulous that it leaves us having to make every decision anyway. I want to see a bylaw that defines things in terms of capacity, supply, risk and cost. Not in terms of residential versus non-residential when the difference might be a fence.
No further discussion. I'm going to put this, it's as on the order paper. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Now, Councillor Vanders, you raised an issue with me that you were departing. I'm not sure that the meeting will be able to do much about it, but I'll allow you to make a statement.
Yes, before I have let the mayor know that I have a hard 5:30 appointment, my higher authority that I'm married to has advised me that I have to attend. She's organised a babysitter already, and I have to leave at 5:15 if that alters anything that the meeting might want to do.
I take it you are referring to the additional item on the end of the non-public part of the meeting. My take on it is we won't be there till tomorrow, half an hour, depending on. So I'm in the hands of the. All things being equal, if you have to go, you have to go. But the meeting will continue.
I have made whatever statement that I intend to do to all councillors by email. If anybody wants any more detail from me, I'm very happy to respond, but it will be tomorrow now rather than today.
Right, item 21. Moved by Councillor Benson Pope, seconded Councillor Bezet. Discussion. Councillor Thompson.
It's a useless waste of time, but based on the previous decision, but I simply wish to quote that there are no operational concerns should connections to the water supply at Hall Road be granted. That seems to me to be the single most relevant statement in the entire report. If we are here to service ratepayers and there is no cost to do so and there are no operational concerns, then I think we should do so.
Councillor Noon.
Once again, you won't be surprised I won't be voting for this one either. And the reasons why, I would prefer for this one to be referred back to IS. We had Mr. Butler here today who indicated there's a 6-inch main at the basis of this subdivision. There's a suggestion that there was a proposal as a housing corporation subdivision on this site. I would want to seek clarification whether that's fact or fiction. I'm not disputing what Mr. Butler said. Or maybe Laura's got the answer. That's great.
Do you wish to address that?
Yeah, it's actually referred to in one of the letters in the report, and I don't know if I can probably verbally indicate you to what it is that he's referring to. But if you look at the draft roadway on 21.3, between the lot marked 71 and the lot marked lot 1 69A, and follow that back up into the hatched area, you'll see a tiny little line sticking out. That's the 6-inch main connection that he's referring to. The Housing Corporation subdivision proposal, if that's the right terminology for it, dates back to the 1950s or 60s, there or thereabouts, so predates the district plan. At that stage there was a sort of general proposal that there was going to be a fairly significant subdivision, much larger than this one, and that's one of the reasons that the infrastructure is physically able to cope. But obviously since that, the land has changed hands, the zoning has changed since that originally went in. And therefore we're now guided by the district plan as it stands. But the main installed, as he's calling it, is literally that tee off there that is would be a potential point of connection if the council were of a mind to grant.
I didn't quite, when you explained where it was, I didn't quite...
So if you see the dotted roadway...
There's a blue one, isn't it?
Mine's in black and white, I'm afraid, but yes, it's probably blue. It's a very short tee of...
Okay, so we've got the wastewater one down the bottom running into lot 2, but the one you're referring to is leading into what potentially
the roadway is that they've blocked.
Yep.
Carry that back on to Hall Road.
Yes, got
and
you.
there's a little tiny stick sticking out. That's what they're referring to.
Okay. Further speakers? Councillor Bizet.
Well, like a lot of councillors, I feel very uneasy with this, and I'm just making these comments now because of the statement or the comment that Councillor Noon made earlier on with regards to someone that he knew quite personally, and had I been in his position, I'd probably feel the same way. But I feel I'm going to be consistent with this and vote against, or go with the recommendation to decline the application. This is not an extraordinary circumstances, I'll go back to the comments that I made earlier on. I think Councillor Van der Bes alluded to it at all. I'm unhappy with this process because I think, we are representing the applicants, so I do feel we have a conflict of interest. And maybe when we do look, if we do it next time, look at the district plan with regards to, or the bylaws with regards to this issue, we could look at some other way of handling it, and maybe an independent body that rules on these sort of decisions. But I'm going to be consistent. I'm going to stay with this. And I know Councillor Thompson's probably sitting there thinking, well, you bend the rules from time to time, and we have, and I have, and I know councillors have from time to time as well. And I think probably the last time I bent the rules was talking about the other applicants that we've had with regards to reticulation connections. So I'm quite strong on this. I'm going to stick with the rules, but I do hope that we get some sort of system in the future that makes it more consistent with what we do.
Councillor Look.
Look, I like to play by the rules too, but I actually wonder about, is it not an extraordinary difference when we say in 2011 November, prospective purchase of lot 69B was granted a water supply, so does that not actually make this almost extraordinary that we're going to allow it?
I guess that would be for the council to decide, but in terms of the context of that 69B, that was granted on the basis that the wastewater reticulation actually lay on the property itself that was being questioned. The question of precedent was raised at the time, and the applicant made statements which are contained in the report around restricting the rights of way to try and avoid that precedent effect. I think also that was one of the very early ones that the council made under the bylaw, and at the time the feeling was that precedent would not be a major problem. Time has perhaps moved on, and the fact people are now quoting precedent is something that may not have been anticipated at that particular point in time.
Councillor Wilson.
I'm not going to support the connection. I support the recommendation. I think when we made this bylaw in 2011, the world was quite a different place. We hadn't done the spatial plan, and we were still looking through things. I think as we go towards what is going to happen is we're going to be confronted by a lot more of these. And what I'm acknowledging is I probably will not be consistent with my previous voting, but I will be determined to think that we're going to make sure that we're going in a path that is we can deal with the weight of what I think will be applications to challenge this as we get through the process of district plan, especially since the district plan will have no effect until after it is adopted. So on that basis, I understand people's annoyance and exasperation of the process, and I will endeavour to do some work as chair of ISCOM to see if there's a better process so we can go through that. But I think that we have to be mindful that this will, that there's a good chance that we'll be asked to do this a lot more often as we go through that district plan process. And so if anyone's looking at my voting and wonder why I've changed, I think that I now understand after the spatial plan that we have to give it more rigour, and during that, and I've learned a lot in that process, and that is why I'll probably be slightly harder on these applications from now on.
On my part, can I just observe, I'm picking up on Councillor Thompson's point, and I think it's a good one, that you look at the operational difficulties or advantages or whatever, and I would hope that those sorts of considerations will be taken into account when the subdivision was done, because the subdivision is rural residential. If it was felt that there was sufficient capacity and it fitted with the other plans at that time, it may very well have been residential. But it was put in place, and part, I would imagine, if the cooperation between planning and water was, as we have been led to understand, then that consideration around operational capability would have been made at the time, and this is why it's a rural residential subdivision that isn't entitled to a water supply. That is the point, I would have thought. So I think you're right. Those considerations have to be made, but I think they're made at the time before people commit, and these people did commit to rural residential and supplying their own water. Any further discussion? Right, I'm going to put it. All those in favour of the recommendation to decline, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against the recommendation to decline, please say no. Can you please raise your hands? Those in support of the recommendation to decline, please raise your hands. Those who are against the recommendation to decline, please 1, 2. It's carried. Now we're putting the next one into non-public. Can I just seek a little guidance from Council? We have now been going for 3.5 hours. Would Council like us to continue till we get to the non-public part and then take a break? Is that or do you want to take a break now or carry on?
Carry on.
I have a time commitment that's going to see me have to leave. I was actually meant to have been at a function at 5:30, which I've now decided to can.
Yeah.
But I do have one I can't cancel.
Right, well,
following that, so
let's keep going. So we're on to item 23. Warrant cards. So, move Councillor Wilson, second Councillor Hawkins. Is there any discussion? There being none, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. 23A. Dunedin, 23A. Dunedin Masters Games Trust update. Someone like to move? Do you want to move?
We just have a couple of representatives there. I'm not quite sure where they've gone to. But anyway, I can talk to it if you like, and I'll move it, yes.
Right. So, well, before you do, is there a seconder? Second, Councillor Noon. Right. Fire away.
Well, the recommendations, just as they are outlined, I can hopefully assure you all that everything is on track to have another successful Games. The purpose of this report really is to bring Council up to date with our funding. It's been quite difficult this year to get the funding because a lot of the gaming trusts are very reluctant or haven't got the funds that they used to. So we're in competition with a lot of others. Nonetheless, we're right on track to break even. Even if we don't get the funding applications that we've got out there at the moment, we still have it. We're still confident, providing we get our 5,500 competitors, then we will be in a break-even position, and the 5.5 is about 5, maybe to 500, maybe 1,000 less than what we got at our last game. So we're relatively confident we're right on track to break even, or maybe even, dare I say, make a small profit. Just to bring the new councillors up to date, the difficulty we have with the Masters Games, we never really know how much, how funds are going until the final week leading into the games, because we're not sure how many competitors front up. But we're confident we'll get the number this year.
Councillor Benson.
Thank you. Just a question of Councillor Bazette. I'm sure he can help. At the bottom of page 23, A3, where you talk about the registration fees and so on. Down in the footnote, as of Friday, you had, however many it was, 23,789. I assume that people pay their registration when they register. That's the, yes. So they're all early birds, and so you're already significantly over your 202,000 threshold. Yes. Is that right?
Councillor Wilson.
I'm going to support this motion. I just do have some sympathy with the Trust having to come to us at this late stage, and the thought that we could ever cancel it. And I find that a peculiarity, because I think it would be fraught to even contemplate that, given the timeframes. And I wish the report was earlier about how the funding went, and we could consider that, because you certainly couldn't do that 2 months out from the event, really. It's pointless.
Of course, this year, because of the election, Councillor Wilson, we were unable to come to you at the time that we normally would have. So really, I guess what it would be is if at this time we were seriously running behind on projections, you would have the opportunity to say, because you now underwrite any loss, you would have the opportunity to say we'd rather pull the plug. But we've got a good team running the games. We would hope that would never happen. It's particularly difficult every second time in an election year.
Councillor McTavish.
Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge the work that has obviously gone in by the Trust Board, and particularly with regards keeping a really solid eye on how costs can be wound back, and I think that's that should be acknowledged by Council and encouraged. So thanks very much to all those involved for that work.
Councillor Dunn.
It is traditional for councillors to get involved with the Masters game, so I just, after the exception of one around the table, but I just put, I won't say that. Okay, but yeah, just put the challenge out there to the other 13 of us to participate and enjoy, because it's certainly a wonderful event.
I think I should actually correct that. That's not entirely factually correct. I think some sports, people who are between 25 and 30 can participate in, but they are limited, not netball. Probably a good thing.
Councillor Law.
I'd just like to say that on that note, my wife can go on as many things as she wants, and I'll pay the fees. Already have.
Right. Are there any further discussion? All right. Recommend it's been moved, and Councillor Zet, do you wish to? No. I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Moving on to item 23B, financial results. And I note that the recommendation should read, the council notes the financial position, not the executive leadership team in the recommendation, just for clarity. So Hawkeye pointed at that last night. Well,
thank you. I was pleased to see somebody spotted the deliberate mistake.
Are there any questions, councillors? Well, Councillor McTavish.
Just at some point, I think it would be helpful if councillors were provided with the implications of the change from DVML's SLA to the structure which is now in place around a rental arrangement for the town hall. But obviously that's not detail that you have now, but I think it would be helpful, or for my understanding anyway, to understand that process and the nature of that change.
We can update you when that's been finalised.
Thank you.
You moved Councillor Wilson, seconded Councillor Staines. Is there any further discussion? Councillor,
Just make a couple of points. I did ask for this to come here because it was going to be too long a time before it would go to a Finance Committee meeting. But clearly the result is favourable. But I would just caution there are a number of timing issues in there, and when you're only 3 months into a financial year, they can be quite significant. And there's about almost $1 million worth of depreciation difference there, which is not cash advantage, so that doesn't help us particularly in terms of actual cash, but it's certainly a positive start to the year, and I think that's the important thing to note at this point in time.
thank you. No further discussion. I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you, Marie. Now, the last item on the public agenda is the 23C, the Ice Sports Dunedin Board Member nomination. Moved Councillor Noon, seconded Councillor Bezet. Are there any questions? There being none, any discussion? There being none, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried.